keeping all of my airbrushes clean is one of the most important parts of my painting process. I never have to deal with any of the issues caused by a dirty airbrush or dried paint in that airbrush because I follow this simple procedure that I use every single day. And keeping your airbrush clean will keep it performing the way that it's intended to, and it only takes like a minute or two after each painting session. So in this video, I'm going to go over the two cleaning procedures that I use every day. One is cleaning in between colors, the color swap, which takes like 10 seconds. And the other is the cleaning process at the end of a painting session or the end of the day, and this takes like a minute or two. And when I'm done with this simple cleaning process, I know that the next time I pick up my airbrush to start painting again, it's going to work properly. No headaches, no frustration involved. And at the end of each day, my airbrush cup looks like this. It's perfectly clean, ready for the next painting session ahead. For this cleaning technique, I use two fluids, distilled water and airbrush cleaner, but for like 95% of my cleaning, I'm just using that water. Now for cleaning and flushing out paint, tap water is just fine. I use 0 TDS water because I own an RODI system, which stands for reverse osmosis deionized water. I use that for reducing my paint, so I always have gallons of it in my studio. But for cleaning and flushing out paint, regular tap water is going to be just fine. For the airbrush cleaning agent, I switched back over to this Iwata airbrush cleaner. I used to use this stuff all the time over a decade ago, and for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been using a different cleaner. But after switching back to this is just what I'm going to be using from now on. It's an amazing cleaner. It's very simple to use as well. And before we begin, I just want to say that I only use acrylic paints these days, like these golden high flow acrylics. So this process is only intended for water-based acrylic paints. And some of you may have a different way of cleaning your airbrush, and that's just fine. These are just the techniques that I use, and I found that it works very well for my painting process, so hopefully it helps a few of you out. So let's say that you're working on your painting or painting a model and it's time to switch colors. And this first part is going to be the color swap, switching from one color to another. Whether I'm switching from hues close to each other on the color wheel, like yellow to orange yellow, or complementary colors like red to green, which if are mixed, they're going to desaturate and start to turn gray. What I like to do is just fully flush out my cup so that the new color added is the exact color that I mixed. While I'm painting, I always have a small tray next to me with a few paper towels in it. And I like to use either a spray bottle or one of these squeeze bottles, tilt the airbrush over, and then just flush everything out. For this process of the color swap, I don't use any cleaner at all. I just use distilled water. And again, to flush this out, you could just use tap water. You're not using this to reduce the paints. And then for any of that residual paint within the color cup, I just place it into one of these small spray out pots and spray it clean. Once it's fully sprayed out, I'll just use a little bit more water, spray it along the edges, and then spray that out again. And once this is fully sprayed out, this color cup is clean enough to swap over to a new color. I'll just place in the new pre-mixed color and start painting. And this is what I do constantly. It's so quick. It's going to take you like 10, maybe 15 seconds at the most. And that's it for my color swaps. I don't use any cleaner. I just use distilled water. Just flush it out a few times. You'll be good to go. And so now let's say that it's the end of the painting session or the end of the day and you want to put your airbrush away. And usually at the end of the day, you're going to see some dried paint along the walls of your color cup. So I always like to give that color cup a nice clean, remove any dried paint before I put the airbrush away. So just like before, I'll start with good old distilled water and just flush everything out of the cup. I generally have a much larger Tupperware or plastic container right next to me as I'm painting. And it's always filled with paper towels just to soak up any of that paint, and then every few days I'll just dump it. Once that cup is rinsed out, I'll just spray any of this residual water into the paper towels or into one of those spray out pots. And then I'll just do the same thing of adding some water, rinsing it, spraying it out a few more times until I notice that the airbrush is looking pretty clean. Now water is going to do a pretty good job, but in order to clean out any of that dried paint, I'm going to switch over to the cleaner. I'll add a small amount of this cleaner to the bottom of the paint cup, and then I'll just use a paper towel to wipe it out clean. I'm not exactly sure what's in this cleaner, but it bubbles like soap, so I'm assuming there's some sort of soap or detergent in it, and it just does a really good job at breaking down or loosening up any dried paint. And so now this next part is important. When you add anything into the paint cup that isn't paint, like a paper towel, you run the risk of getting something into your airbrush that shouldn't be there. A paper towel could leave some lint or fibers in the cup, a cotton swab can leave a small cotton fiber, and a paintbrush might leave behind a stray hair. And so for obvious reasons, you don't want this getting into your airbrush. It could start clogging things up, especially around the nozzle or any of the small passages. And so after you clean out the inside of your paint cup with something like a paper towel, make sure you don't just start spraying the solution out. Instead, what I recommend is to tip the cup over, dump any of that cleaner out, and switch back over to water to rinse everything out within the cup. I'm using one of these squeeze bottles, and what I'm doing is I'm basically irrigating everything out of the cup. So if any fibers got in there from cleaning, it's not going to get into the airbrush. It's going to get flushed right out of the paint cup. And the same thing is going to go for dried paint. If you use that cleaner to clean off any dried paint on the walls of the paint cup, you don't want to just start spraying that, getting that forced into the nozzle. You're going to get a clog that way. So make sure you just dump it, flush it, just irrigate everything out of that paint cup. And I just rinse out this color cup with some distilled water just for a few seconds, maybe 5 seconds at most. Nice and easy. And so now that the color cup is pretty clean, what I'm going to do is go right back over to the cleaner, add some into the airbrush, and then I'm just going to spray some of it into a spray out pot. This way you're not atomizing any of that cleaner into the air. And at this point the airbrush is going to be clean, but one thing that I like to do is just slightly retract the needle, add a little bit more cleaner into that paint cup, and then cover the nozzle with my finger, press down on the trigger, and just backflush a little bit of this cleaner for a few seconds. I literally do this for like 2 to 3 seconds just to make sure that there's no residual paint within that cup somewhere. I'm always nervous that something in a cleaner may interact with the paint, so what I do is I just do one more flush with distilled water just to remove any excess cleaner. Once everything is fully flushed out, there's not going to be paint in this cup. You can see that if I remove the needle, there's very, very little paint on it. And so the key to keeping your airbrush clean is just make sure you flush it out really well with some distilled water and some cleaner when you're finished. And just make sure that you don't let any paint dry within the brush. And the needle is the only thing that I'll remove from my airbrush at the end of the day to clean off. I'll add some of my airbrush cleaner to a shop towel and then just gently wipe off the needle. And then I'll just add some distilled water to another part of that shop towel and then just clean it off to make sure that there's no sort of airbrush cleaner on the needle. And then once I reinsert the needle, screw it down, this airbrush is perfectly clean. I could put this airbrush away, I could place it on the airbrush holder, and I know that the next time I need it, it's ready to go. And so that's basically it for my cleaning process. It's what I do every single day. It's really easy and it's extremely effective. And so to finish this video up, I just want to show you a few bonus tips. During the day, if I'm taking a break from painting for an hour, maybe 2 hours, what I like to do is just take some distilled water and add it into the paint cup. I flush out all the paint like I do with a color swap, and then I just add some distilled water in here. I'll press down and pull back on the trigger so some of this water gets within the airbrush, and then I can walk away from it for a little while. If there's a small amount of residual paint in there, the water is going to prevent it from drying. So it's very simple and it works great. And I never leave distilled water in my airbrush for extended periods of time because it's eventually going to evaporate. So I'll just add that distilled water so that I can walk away from my airbrush for an hour or two and not have to worry about paint drying within it. And finally, here's one extra tip for using an airbrush cleaner, whichever one you choose to use with your paints. Even if an airbrush cleaner is generally safe or non-toxic, you don't want to be breathing it in, so you don't want to atomize it into the air. So like I showed before, generally I'm using a spray out pot, but sometimes I don't even spray it. And so a nice thing about a side feed airbrush is that I could use a squeeze bottle to just gently run some cleaner through the side of my airbrush, right out the nozzle, and this will just gently flush out anything that might be in the airbrush. And when I do this, I always slightly retract the needle just a few millimeters so that the nozzle is fully open. In this way, the needle is still forming a seal with a packing screw just behind the airbrush cup. This way, when you do this, no water or cleaner is going to get back into the body of the airbrush. And of course, you don't have to do this. I just want to show you a few different options if you'd like. A spray out pot like this is still my go-to. It's what I'm using most of the time. So there you go. That's how I keep all of my airbrushes perfectly clean. It's what I do every single day. 10 to 15 seconds for the color swap just using distilled water, and then a minute or two at the end of the day just to flush everything out with some distilled water and some airbrush cleaner. And the best part, as you just saw, is that there's no disassembly required for your cleaning or color swaps. I do hope that you enjoyed this one, maybe pick something up. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you back here next week. But before I go, like always, I want to say thank you to these incredible people scrolling up on the right side of the screen right now, the current channel members. I appreciate all of you so very much. You really help keep this channel going, so thank you all. And I'd personally like to give a shout out to the newest member this week, that's Ed. Thank you so much for joining and welcome. And thank you very much to Donnie for rejoining at a tier 3. It's very nice of you. I appreciate that. So take care, everyone. I hope you guys are all having a nice day. Have a great week. I'll see you back here next time.